man, they put in double rehearsal this week, next week, and they've done a really good job. Can I get my slides, please? So tonight we're going to be talking about surrender and what that looks like from a biblical perspective, what that looks like in the Bible with a couple of examples from Scripture. But before we do that, I have a question for everybody, and it's going to be on the screen. It's this. It's how do you kneel? And you say, well, I certainly don't do it on my elbows. And that's great. I appreciate that. That shouldn't be how you kneel because those are your elbows. But that's not the point I'm trying to make with that question. We'll get back to that towards the end of tonight and what that means, and we'll answer it later on. I just wanted to put that in the back of your heads for now so you can look at it as we go throughout our talk and as we look at these people from Scripture. So, surrender defined normally has to do with defeat, has to do with losing a battle, losing a war, waving a white flag like that one up there. But that's also not the point that I'm trying to make with that tonight. It's not the definition that I wanted. So the definition from a biblical standpoint, as per what Google says, is a believer will completely give up their own will, and they'll take in or exchange it for the will of a higher power, which in our case is God, right? And they'll do so intentionally, they'll do it deliberately, they'll do it on purpose. And so doing that every day is something that you have to be consistent with. It is something you have to wake up and decide to do, go to work, go to school and decide to do, eat lunch and decide to do. It's not a one and done thing. And so that's something that I like to call, an attitude of total surrender, having that attitude, making that part of your lifestyle. And I heard a quote from a movie once, not a Star Wars movie, not to worry about any do or do not, there is no try from me. It's a football movie, actually. And a coach is talking to his players and other coaches that are around him. And the quote goes like this. He says, if your attitude stinks, it means your heart's not right. And then he proceeds to go around and, kind of sniff the hearts of the players and the coaches around him. And, he tells them, well, you stink, and they're all sweaty football players. Of course they stink. So tonight, that being said, tonight we're going to look at two examples from Scripture. One of whom, his attitude about surrender and giving up his will for the will of God, his attitude about that kind of stink. And the other one, his attitude smelled like lavender, vanilla, all the good smells that we like to smell. And I'll let you figure out who those are as we move along tonight and as we talk about these people. But our first example is Jonah. And, we all know the story of the great fish, doesn't say whale in there anywhere. We all know that part of the story. He was swallowed by a fish for 3 days, and then, now what? What happens after that? Who is Jonah? And so before we get into that tonight, I kind of want to talk about who he is, his background, and then we'll get into the book of Jonah, and we'll go through that a little bit. So Jonah is kind of this hotshot prophet from Israel. Around the time of 800, 750 BC, remember BC counts down, AD counts up. I don't know why that is. It just is that way. And I say he's a hotshot prophet because you can read about this in 2 Kings. It's in chapter 14, but basically, long story short, there's this big war between Assyria and Israel, who are enemies. They don't get along. And Jonah said to the king of Israel, he said, hey, there's this war that's going to happen, and you're going to win. And then it happened, and Israel won. And so everyone in Israel's like, oh, this Jonah dude knows what he's talking about. He's very well respected by the people because of all the prophesying that he did. I guess that's the way to say that. But it's not anything that Jonah decided to go do. It was God working through Jonah and speaking through Jonah into the lives of these people. And so that's where we pick up in the book of Jonah. And tonight we're going to go through chapters 1, 2, and 3. I know that sounds like a lot. But I'm going to explain and summarize a little bit chapter 1. We're going to read chapter 2 together. It's going to be on the screen. And then I'm going to explain and summarize chapter 3. And then we'll look at another example really quick. And then we'll be done. We'll play dodgeball after we sing another song. So, Jonah chapter 1. God comes to Jonah and says, hey, Jonah, I want to work through you again, just like I did in 2 Kings. And I want you to go to Nineveh. And I want you to preach to these people who were there. And Jonah says no. And you're like, well, that stinks. Why did Jonah say no to God? Well, Nineveh is the capital city of Assyria. And you remember what I said a couple minutes ago, Jonah's from Israel. And those two countries, Assyria and Israel, they don't get along, they're enemies. And so Jonah hates these people who are in Nineveh. And he says, no, I'm not going to go do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to preach to these people. And so he literally goes the opposite way. And you say, you hear that all the time, people run from God or whatever. If you look at the map in the back of the Bible that none of us ever look at, Nineveh's here, and where Jonah went, he went to Tarshish, or tried to go to Tarshish. It's way over here. So this dude literally goes the other way, like the total opposite way from what God is telling him to do. So, Jonah chapter 1, God says, Jonah, I want to use you. Jonah says, no. And Jonah gets on a boat, these sailors who are sailing, as they do. And basically, God sends a storm that rocks the boat. That was my pun for the night. I appreciate those of you who laughed at that. So God sends a storm, he rocks the boat, and basically, long story short, these sailors are praying to their gods because they don't believe in the same one that we do. And nothing's happening, the storm isn't being calmed. And so they go to Jonah, who's asleep on the bottom of the ship somehow, and they're like, dude, you need to get with your God and fix this. And he says, well, no, I can't because I'm running from my God because he wanted me to go do this thing and I really don't want to do it. And so they toss him overboard, right, into the sea. And side note, nowhere in Scripture have I found yet, I might still be looking, but nowhere in Scripture does it say that Jonah took swim lessons. So you can imagine that this dude is drowning, right? And he says that in Jonah chapter 2. We'll read that in a little bit. But he is drowning, he's sinking, nothing happens. And at the end of chapter 1, it says that God appoints a great fish, not a whale, a great fish to come and swallow Jonah. And you say, well, why does that happen? And I think it happens for 3 reasons. One, to get Jonah's attention. Because Jonah is running from God, he's disobeying God, he's acting kind of in a hateful way towards God. Just like Jonah believes these Ninevite people are doing. And so God says, hey, you're doing all these same things that these Ninevite people are doing, and I'm sending this fish to not kill you, but to protect you. And that's the second reason, for safety, just, because he's drowning. And so if you didn't know, this fish don't really drown that often. And so him being swallowed by the fish is a way to keep him safe in the sea. And the third way is like provision through like the way of transportation. He's taking it from the middle of the sea, where he's flailing about, doing whatever, to dry land, where he gets vomited up. And that's just really funny to me. But he gets vomited up in the dry land. So that's the end of chapter 1, him being in the fish, him getting swallowed by the fish just to get his attention, safety, transportation. All right? So while he's in the fish, he's kind of realizing, hey, God, you have my attention now. And so he starts to pray to God. And his prayer goes like this. Jonah chapter 2, it says, while Jonah was in the stomach of the fish, he prayed to the Lord his God. He said, I was in very bad trouble, obviously. He says, I called to the Lord for help, and he answered me. I was deep in the grave. I cried to you, and you heard my voice. And he says, you threw me into the sea. Your powerful waves splashed over me. I went down into the deep sea. The water was all around me. And then I thought, I must go where you cannot see me. But I continued looking to your holy temple for help. He says, the seawater closed over me. The water covered my mouth, and I could not breathe. I went down into the deep sea. Seaweed wrapped around my head. I was at the bottom of the sea, the place where the mountains begin. So just like we said, no swim lessons, this dude is drowning. So much so that he's at the bottom of the sea, where seaweed's wrapped around his head, the place where the mountains begin. Because beyond the mountains don't float, right? And so, he's at the bottom of the sea. And he says, I thought I was locked in this prison forever, but the Lord my God took me out of my grave. He says, God, you gave me life again. My soul gave up all hope, but then I remembered the Lord. I prayed to you, and you heard my prayers in your holy temple. He says, some people worship useless idols, kind of like the sailors that we talked about. He said, those statues never help them. I will give sacrifices to you, and I will praise and thank you. I will make special promises to you, and I will do what I promise. Salvation only comes from the Lord. And so, those special promises that he's talking about, I looked up at some commentaries and some other readings on this passage, and it says that promise that he's talking about, that he'll make, is going to Nineveh and preaching to these people that he hated. And so, but I underline that one part right there, it says salvation only comes from the Lord. Because just like God did for Jonah, taking him out of his grave of disobedience and sin, he can do the same thing for us. Out of disobedience, out of sin, out of whatever your blank is there, whatever grave you're in, he can take you out of it if you allow him to. And so salvation only comes from him. It's not through anything that Jonah did. It's not through anything that we can do. We can't earn it. We especially don't deserve it, but if you think about it, if you can earn something, you can lose it. And like Jim talked about a couple weeks ago, you can't lose your salvation because it's a gift from God, should you choose to accept it. So, that's Jonah chapter 2. So Jonah finally says, okay, God, I surrender. I'm giving you my will, and I'm going to take yours. I'm going to do what you want me to do. So once he finally surrenders his will, once he takes in God's will and aligns his desires with God's, he finally goes to Nineveh to preach. Now, just to give you a perspective on this city, because we've been talking about it a lot, and it's an important part of the story. Nineveh is not Troy. I can talk about Troy a little bit, because that's where I come from. Nineveh does not have maybe a couple hundred people and one red light. It doesn't have one gas station. This place is huge. Population-wise, it's about twice the size of a temple, to put it in perspective for most of us in here. And so this one guy goes to this huge city in a nation of people that he hated and preached, and he sparked a revival in this city, which basically means that these people who once hated God turned to God, right? And so he sparks this revival in this huge city with all these people because he allows God to work in him and through him, to speak through him. All because that all starts when Jonah says, okay, God, it's not my will, but it's yours, and I'll do what you want me to do. So, Jonah surrendering, like we talked about, in a way, kind of foreshadows our second example from Scripture tonight, that example being Jesus. And like I just said, Jonah kind of says, okay, God, not my will, but yours. And Jesus says the same thing. It foreshadows Jesus. In the garden, the night before Jesus is crucified, he's praying to God, and he says, God, I don't want to die. I don't want to go die for these people. I don't want to die on a cross. And he's kind of freaking out. And you say, well, that doesn't sound right, because that's Jesus, and that's what he did. That's why we wear the necklaces, why we have the church. You know, that's the reason for our faith, is him dying on the cross and raising from the grave, right? And you have to remember that Jesus is fully God, yeah, but he's also fully man. And so fully man, Jesus is probably freaking out right now. Because I can't think of anyone in this room, anyone outside these walls who'd say, yeah, I'll go die on a cross for one person, let alone the entire world. You know, I'll go die on a cross for not only those who love me, but for people who hate me, people who will never choose me, people who know of me, will live their entire lives for me, but will never truly love me, will just live as fake Christians. You know what I mean? And Jesus chooses to do this because at the end of his prayer, like it says in the parentheses right there, at the end of his prayer, he says, okay, God, this stuff is scary. This stuff is stuff that I don't want to do, but it's not my will, it's yours, and I'll do it. And so, Jonah surrendering his will, going to Nineveh, is similar to Jesus surrendering his will by dying on the cross in the garden. And like I said, we're looking at Jesus tonight, and you know, Jonah surrendered his life to go to Nineveh to preach so this city wouldn't be destroyed by God. And Jesus surrendered his life for us, literally died on a cross for us, sacrificed himself for us, so that we could have life, so that we could have a relationship with him, right? And Jesus recognizes this. He talks about Jonah a little bit, and he talks about how Jonah has this resurrection, right? And you say, you know, Jonah didn't die necessarily like Jesus did, so what's this resurrection look like? And in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus is talking to his disciples, these people who are around him, and he mentioned, I just stepped on something, I'm sorry. He mentions Jonah by name. He's the only prophet from the Old Testament that Jesus mentions by name. And he mentions him, and he says to his disciples, he makes this connection between Jonah's time in the fish and his time in the grave. You know, it's both 3 days, they're both super far down into the earth. And he talks about how Jonah's resurrection saved the entire city of Nineveh. Saved 120,000 people, saved this huge city that we talked about. And then he talks about how his resurrection and how his raising from the grave is going to save the world. Did save the world. Saved you and me, right? And gave us an opportunity to be here tonight, to have a relationship with him, to let him work through us just like he did with Jonah. And maybe that's not being in a huge city, but there are other ways that God is able to work in us. And so his prayer in the garden that night, his saying, okay, God, not my will, but yours, is an act of surrender. It's an attitude of surrender, like we talked about at the very beginning of this. And so you see this in Jesus. And I saw, going off on a slight side note, I saw 4 letters a lot growing up. And saw them on bracelets a lot, saw them on t-shirts a lot, saw them in a Lifeway Christian store a lot. And it's these 4 letters. It was WWJD, and had a question mark sometimes. These letters stand for what would Jesus do? You know, what did he do? What would he do? And it's kind of a way to remind ourselves, you know, if we're in a bad situation or stressful situation, you know, what would Jesus do? How would he act? How would he respond? And it's a way of helping us to live our lives more like Christ, right? And so in this sense, in this story that we're talking about tonight, what would he do? What did he do? And the answer is very obvious. We've already talked about it. He surrendered, right? He surrendered his will in the garden, surrendered his life on the cross, surrendered years of his life to ministry, to reaching people, healing people, performing all these miracles. And, I just said those 4 letters kind of represent how we should live our lives. What would Jesus do? The next obvious question is, how should we respond? And you say, well, like Jesus did. And that being said, we should do the same. We should also surrender our lives. And I'm not saying, to spend 3 years walking across the Middle East doing ministry. I'm not saying you die on a cross. I'm not saying you be resurrected, because I don't really think we can. But we should do the same. We should be able to surrender our lives. And you say, well, that sounds kind of frightening. I don't want to die. I don't want to spend all this time walking across. And that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is there are other aspects of our lives that we have that we can surrender to God, and that we can allow God to use, allow God to speak through us with. And so what should we surrender? The very obvious, easiest way to put it is our lives, but what does that mean? What parts of our lives can we surrender? We have time, things like money, things like relationships. We have things like insecurity, self-image issues, things like temptation, things like pain. And you say, well, geez, Alex, time, money, relationships, everyone's got those. But these other things, the self-image issues and the insecurities and the temptations and the pain, I don't deal with that stuff. I'm a Christian, I follow Christ, or I try to be a good person, I try to be nice to people, I try to do good things, and I don't deal with these things. And that's an outward appearance, it's a mask. And I used to say the same thing, that those things didn't affect me because I was a Christian. I grew up in church. Here I am speaking. I did this last summer a little bit, I'm this good guy and these things don't mess with me. And then they did. About 2 months ago, specifically 2 months, 5 days ago, it was a Sunday morning, and I got a call from my mom after I got out of church in Denton, which is where I go to college, for those of you who don't know. And I got a call from my mom, and all it had was a missed call and a voicemail, right? If you know my mom, that's not how these things work. There's a missed call, there were 5 text messages. How is your phone not on? And you didn't answer me? Why didn't you answer me? Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? And that's not bashing my mom. She's over there. Don't look at her. She'll be embarrassed. But that's just how she is, right? And so I see this missed call and this voicemail. I'm like, wow, this must be something weird because, it's not, there's no 5 texts. And I just have this thing for voicemails, so I just listen to voicemails and they come on. So I pick up my phone before I get out of the parking lot and I listen to it, and the first word she says, I can just tell that she's crying, has been for a while. And then I start to think, what caused this? What's going on? And my thoughts go to the twins, to my dad, to our house, to the dog. I'm like, what's going on? Because why is she crying on Sunday morning? Why aren't they in church right now? And so I start thinking, and I'm like, man, I really need to, sometimes, she'll tell you this too, sometimes I don't always return calls. But I was like, man, this is a call I need to return. And so, the dial tone is going, and it's ringing, and I'm waiting for her to pick up. And I'm thinking to myself, what happened? What went on that caused this? Why is she crying? And I started to piece together, either there's some sort of family emergency, something that I've happened before, maybe it's something with the house, like I said, or someone died. And I start to think about, well, who's next on the list, and who's old in our family and whatnot. And that's not me being like, wow, I have this hit list, or wow, I want these people to die because I don't, they're my family, I love them. But me and the twins, we have this great grandma who's 90-something, she's super old, but she's had health issues for a long time, for a couple of years now. And when they started to get more serious, the doctors said, okay, you have this much time, theoretically, and little by little it's been chopped away, and it's getting close to the end of that timeline that they gave us. And so I'm just building up this wall, and okay, this is what she's gonna tell me, and I'm gonna have to drive and go see them because it just finally happened. And like I said, it's not anything that I wanted, it's not anything that was on the list, it's just something that you kind of expect after years of someone who's that old being that sick. And so answer the phone. She does, I don't. She answers the phone, and I'm just like, what's going on? She's still crying. And she tells me that my little cousin, my 13-year-old cousin, had committed suicide that morning. And all the walls I built up, all the expectations I had just tumbled down. And I just was sitting in my truck with my phone in my hand, and I didn't know what to do. And I was in shock. That's not something that you expect. That's not even something that's in the back of your mind. It's just totally out. It's not anything that you can prepare yourself for. And I say that to say this: the pain and the temptation and the like all those things that you think can't touch you, can touch you, and they can hit you very hard. And before I just brush over that, she told me that my cousin's, his brother had found him in his closet that morning, and he was dead, and he had been dead for a while. And that's not me saying, I'm not telling you the story to tell you that oh, it's okay, and we're fine now, because we're not. It's something that I deal with every day. It's something that the twins, my parents, our entire family deals with every day, and it's a lifelong process. But that's something that you think can touch you, and it does, and you have to say, okay, God, I don't know why this happened. I don't know how you're going to use this. I don't know why you decided that this is a part of my life, but I have to trust you with it. I have to surrender this thing to you because I can't handle it on my own. My family can't handle it. The combined forces of my entire family cannot handle it. Only God can. And it's saying, God, here, you take this pain, you take whatever it is. In my case, it's pain. But God, you take whatever it is. I trust you with it. I surrender this thing to you because you can handle it, and I can't. And that's the first step. Surrender is the first step to knowing that He can handle it. Whatever your blank is, He can handle it. But you can't. I can't. The church can't. Anyone outside these walls can't. And that's the first step to knowing that He can, is that we can't. It's part of giving it to Him and trusting Him, because He's bigger than our fears. He calms the worries. He offers a way out of our temptation. His love and His presence and His joy are richer than money. He's eternal for all time. We are made in His image. It says so in the very beginning of the Bible. He created relationships, desires one with all of you, and He's never going to break your heart. He's never going to hurt you. All He's going to do is fill your heart with love, peace, and joy. Should you choose to accept it. He changes, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, the identity crisis. He changes your identity from a sinner to a saint to a child of God. Should you choose to accept it? Should you say, God, here, I surrender this to you. I trust you. You say, okay, well, how do I do that? We know from Scripture, we know from things we've learned in church, things we've learned being taught by people in church. It's God's desire for us to surrender. It's God's desire for us to trust Him with these things, but it's our decision. At the end of everything I've said, should you choose to accept it? Should you choose to do it? It's our decision. Even though it's His desire, it's a choice that we have to make every day. We have to have the attitude of total surrender. And so how do we do that? Like I just said earlier, knowing that He can blank. Whatever your blank is, He can handle it. He can take care of it. He can take care of you. Whatever it is, He can do it. And that question I asked you at the beginning of the night, how do you kneel? Kneel on two knees, totally surrendered. You say, well, what does that mean, to kneel on two knees? I don't mean live on one knee. Don't live halfway surrendered. Don't say, God, you can have my time and my money, my relationships, but you can't have my temptation. You can't have my pain. You can't have my self-image issues. You say, God, no, you can have all of it. I surrender all of it to you because I can't handle any of it. It's given to me by you, but I can't handle any of it. I can't handle the pain. I can't handle the time. I can't handle the money. I can't handle any of it. But He can. So don't live life. Don't have your attitude of, okay, God, you can have some things, so you can't have all things, right? Give Him everything. Live on two knees. Live totally surrendered to God. And you say, okay, well, what's next? What's a way for me to apply this in my life? What's a way that I can start doing this? Because there are things I'm dealing with. There are things that I have to surrender. There are things that, I can't handle. So what do? Jim told me this. I thought it was really practical. And so I'm going to steal it from him while he's not here. Go home tonight, get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, or something to write with, obviously, because you're getting a piece of paper. But write down what needs to be surrendered. Say, God, this pain. God, this temptation. God, this part of my time. God, this relationship, this money that I've been given, whatever it is, my self-image issues, this insecurity, that insecurity, write it all down on a piece of paper. Title it surrender list, title it whatever you want to. But then, once you've written all that stuff down, get rid of the paper. Trash it, burn it, shred it, don't eat it. That's not healthy. That's not a good thing. And that will not end well for you. That's another thing you're going to put on your list. But point being, get rid of it in a healthy way. Get rid of it. And give those things to God and say, God, I surrender. It's not my will. It's not my time. Not my money. Not my relationships. Not my self-image. Not my temptation. Not my insecurity. Not my pain. You take it. I trust you. Surrender those things to God. Let's pray. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for these two examples from Scripture that we've looked at who just totally surrendered their lives to you, who you have worked through in so many ways, Lord. And I just pray that as we leave here tonight, that you keep that on our minds, keep that on our hearts, and just allow us to see you in a new way, that you would reveal yourself to us in a new way, and that you just help us to surrender not just the biggest parts of our life, not just the little details, but our entire lives to you, Lord. I pray that you help us to live on two knees and have an attitude of total surrender. In your name we pray. Amen.